What would you do if you saw someone stop breathing in front of you and everyone around you screamed that it was too late? This is the story of a veteran nurse who, in a moment of utter desperation, used an ancient technique that modern medicine had forgotten. What happened next shocked the entire medical team and saved a life everyone had already considered lost. Get ready to meet Victoria Hayes and discover the secret she's been carrying for decades. My name is Victoria Hayes, and at 57, I thought I'd seen it all in the halls of Seattle General Hospital. 28 years of practice have taught me that medicine is an exact science, with rigid protocols and standardized procedures. But on that cold December night, everything I believed in would be tested in ways I never imagined. It was 2 a.m. when the patient arrived. Michael Thompson, 42, collapsed in the hospital parking lot after suffering a massive heart attack. Time was against us from the first second. As the emergency team worked frantically, I observed every movement with the precision of someone who had dedicated decades to the art of saving lives. Dr. Stevens led the resuscitation with all the skill I knew: CPR, defibrillator, adrenaline. We followed every advanced cardiac life support protocol to the letter. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The monitor continued to show a relentless flat line. The deathly silence of the flat line echoed through the room, interrupted only by the rhythmic sound of the mechanical ventilator. That's when I heard the words no healthcare professional ever wants to hear. Call the time of death. Dr. Stevens glanced at the clock on the wall. 2:43 a.m. Another life lost. Another family to be shattered by the news. But something inside me refused to accept that defeat. Something my grandmother had planted in me long ago. I grew up in the green fields of Tennessee, where my grandmother, Ruby Hayes, was known for miles as a healer. While other children played with dolls, I followed her around rural farms, watching her care for people who had no access to hospitals. She had magical hands and knew secrets that had been passed down from generation to generation. I vividly remember the day I witnessed my grandmother revive a man everyone thought was dead. He was a farmer who had been in a tractor accident. When we arrived, he was unconscious, with no apparent pulse, and his lips were blue. The neighbors were already talking about funeral arrangements. But Grandma Ruby wasn't intimidated. She placed her rough hands on specific points on his body, points she called portals of life. Then she began a rhythmic sequence of pressures and movements that resembled an ancient dance. She pressed points on his neck, chest, and hands, always following a pattern I memorized without understanding. Victoria, she told me that day, medicine from books is important, but never forget that the human body holds secrets that doctors have not yet discovered. These techniques come from the Cherokee Indians who lived on these lands. They knew things about life and death that we have lost along the way. The farmer awoke. He took a deep breath. He came back to life when everyone else had lost hope. In that moment, a seed was planted in my 12-year-old soul, a seed that lay dormant for decades until that fateful night in Seattle. "Stop! He's not breathing anymore!" Nurse Jennifer shouted, removing the oxygen mask from Michael's face. Her words echoed through the emergency room like a death sentence. Dr. Stevens stopped CPR, his hands shaking slightly, a sign of physical and emotional exhaustion I rarely saw in him. The team stepped away from the stretcher. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the continuous beeping of the heart monitor confirming our defeat. 45 minutes of intense resuscitation had passed. We administered epinephrine, atropine, and performed multiple defibrillations. We followed every protocol in the most up-to-date medical manuals. Dr. Stevens looked at each team member, searching our faces for any sign that there was still something left to try. But we all knew the cruel truth. We had done everything modern medicine could allow. The cerebral ischemia time had already exceeded any acceptable limit. Even if we could reverse the cardiac arrest now, the neurological consequences would be devastating. "Someone needs to talk to the family," Dr. Stevens murmured, removing his surgical gloves with a weary gesture. Michael's wife had been waiting in the waiting room for over an hour, accompanied by their 2 teenage children. How do you explain to a family that we did everything we could, but it wasn't enough? At that critical moment, I felt a strange energy course through my body. My grandmother Ruby's words came back like a distant echo. "Never give up while there's a thread of life left, Victoria. Sometimes what feels like death is just the spirit resting." What questions do you have about what you've seen so far? Leave them in the comments. As Dr. Stevens walked out of the room, I approached the gurney where Michael Thompson lay. His face was pale, his lips blue, but something caught my attention. A gut feeling I couldn't explain told me it wasn't too late. I placed my hand on the pulse in his neck, searching for any sign the machines might have missed. "Victoria, what are you doing?" Jennifer asked, looking at me with a confused expression. "Doctor, Stevens has already pronounced the deceased. We need to prepare the body and call the family." I completely ignored his words. I closed my eyes and let my hand glide over the points my grandmother had taught me decades ago. I felt a barely perceptible vibration, an energy that modern instruments couldn't detect. It was as if Michael's spirit was still struggling, caught somewhere between life and death. Please, just give me 5 minutes, I pleaded with the team, which was beginning to disperse. I know it sounds crazy, but I have a technique that might work. An old technique I learned from my grandmother. Dr. Stevens's skeptical look when he returned to the room told me everything. Victoria, you're an excellent nurse, but we have protocols to follow. The patient has been clinically dead for 45 minutes. Any further action would be unethical. Dr. Stevens, I replied with a firmness that surprised me. My grandmother saved lives with techniques that formal medicine rejected. Just give me 5 minutes. If it doesn't work, I take full responsibility. My hands were already positioned on Michael's body, following an ancient pattern etched in my memory. Thank you so much for sticking with the video until this point. The best is yet to come. With trembling but determined hands, I began applying the technique that had slumbered in my memory for decades. First, I located the points my grandmother called life force portals, specific areas of the body where the Cherokee believed the life force was concentrated. I placed my fingers at the base of Michael's skull, where his neck meets his head, applying gentle but firm pressure in circular motions. Simultaneously, my other hand found the point in the center of his chest, slightly below his sternum. I then began a rhythmic sequence, 3 pressures at the base of his skull, followed by 5 on his chest, all the while maintaining a specific breathing pattern my grandmother had taught me. What exactly are you doing? Dr. Stevens asked, watching every movement closely. His medical curiosity had overcome his initial skepticism. It's an ancient neuromuscular stimulation technique, I explained as I continued the procedure. The Cherokee Indians believed that there are points on the body where vital energy is concentrated. When stimulated in the correct sequence, they can reactivate functions that seem lost. I moved my hands to Michael's wrists, applying pressure to specific points corresponding to energy meridians. The technique required not only anatomical knowledge, but also a deep spiritual connection with the patient. I could feel every fiber of my being focused on that moment, channeling decades of suppressed knowledge. The room was completely silent. The team watched with a mixture of fascination and skepticism. I continued for another 2 minutes, alternating between different pressure points, always maintaining the breathing rhythm my grandmother had taught me. Inhale deeply after every 3 pressures, exhale slowly after every 5. 3 minutes into the technique, something extraordinary began to happen. The heart rate monitor, which had shown nothing but a flat line for nearly an hour, began emitting isolated beeps, first one, then another, until an irregular but unmistakable pattern of heartbeats began to form on the screen. "Oh my God," Jennifer whispered, her eyes fixed on the monitor. "He has a pulse." Dr. Stevens rushed to check his vital signs. His blood pressure was returning. His oxygen saturation was slowly rising. But the most remarkable thing happened when Michael Thompson opened his eyes. His lips moved, trying to form words, as his lungs took in air on their own. Where am I?" were his first words, spoken in the hoarse voice of someone who had returned from far away. His wife, called in a hurry, rushed into the room just as he tried to sit up on the stretcher. What followed was a flurry of medical activity, immediate neurological exams to assess potential sequelae, CT scans to check for brain damage, a full battery of tests to understand how this was possible. To everyone's astonishment, Michael showed no significant neurological sequelae. "In 30 years of practice, I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Stevens confessed to me hours later, still processing what he'd witnessed. "You just challenged everything we know about brain death and ischemic time. How is this possible?" I watched Michael being wheeled into the ICU, conscious and talking to his family. At that moment, I felt the spiritual presence of my grandmother Ruby, as if she were smiling from beyond, proud to see that her ancestral teachings had saved another life. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear. In the days following the Seattle miracle, as the local press dubbed it, my life was turned upside down. The hospital launched an internal investigation to understand exactly what had happened that night. Medical ethics committees questioned my procedures, and some colleagues viewed me with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. Dr. Matthews, head of the emergency department, summoned me to a formal meeting 3 days after the incident. "Victoria, you saved a life in an extraordinary way, but you also violated established protocols. You applied a technique not recognized by modern medicine to a patient officially declared dead. This raises serious ethical questions." I understood his concerns. Medicine is based on scientific evidence, rigorous protocols, and standardized procedures for a reason. It allows professionals from different backgrounds to work together in a coordinated and predictable manner. My action, successful as it was, had shattered that framework. "Dr. Matthews," I replied calmly, I understand the implications of what I did, but at that moment, I felt there was a chance, however small. Michael Thompson is alive today, with no neurological damage, hugging his family. Doesn't that count for something? The investigation lasted 2 weeks. Specialist doctors from other hospitals came to study the case. Neurologists were perplexed by the lack of brain damage after nearly an hour of cardiac arrest. Cardiologists couldn't explain how the heart had spontaneously restarted. The only possible explanation seemed to be the technique I had applied. During this time, I received unexpected support from colleagues who had witnessed similar cases throughout their careers, but had never had the courage to speak out about them. Older nurses would seek me out in the hallways, whispering stories of ancient techniques their grandmothers had taught them. The turning point came when Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a medical anthropologist at the University of Washington, became interested in the case. She had spent years studying indigenous medicinal practices and was fascinated when she learned about the Cherokee technique I had used. Her research revealed information that completely changed my perspective on what had happened. "Victoria," she explained to me during our first conversation, "what you did has a solid scientific basis. Even though Western medicine has ignored these practices for centuries, the points your grandmother taught you correspond precisely to areas of high concentration of nerve endings that control vital autonomic functions." Dr. Rodriguez showed me recent studies on acupuncture and stimulation of specific points on the body. Research at Asian universities had documented cases of successful resuscitation using similar techniques. The sequence of pressures I had applied directly stimulated the vagus nerve, responsible for controlling heart rate and breathing. The Cherokee developed an intuitive understanding of human neurophysiology that we are only now beginning to understand scientifically, she continued. Your grandmother preserved knowledge that goes back hundreds of years of empirical observation about the human body. The most striking revelation came when we discovered that hospitals in China were already using similar techniques as standard protocol in cases of prolonged cardiac arrest. The success rate was 15% higher than conventional Western methods. Controlled studies showed that stimulating specific points during resuscitation significantly increased the chances of complete neurological recovery. Dr. Stevens, initially skeptical, became a leading advocate for incorporating these techniques into hospital protocols. "We have much to learn from ancient knowledge," he publicly admitted during a medical conference. Michael Thompson's case became a turning point at Seattle General Hospital. Dr. Matthews, initially concerned about the ethical implications of his actions, began leading an initiative to study traditional medicinal techniques that could complement modern protocols. "Victoria opened our eyes to possibilities we had ignored out of academic arrogance," he declared during a hospital general meeting 6 months after the incident. "We can no longer dismiss ancient knowledge without proper scientific investigation." A pilot program called Integrative Emergency Medicine was created, incorporating scientifically validated traditional techniques into standard protocols. I was invited to lead the training of the nursing staff in these new approaches. Michael Thompson became an unwitting ambassador for this new perspective. His complete recovery and inspiring story attracted national attention. Television programs, articles in medical journals, international conferences. Everyone wanted to understand how a Cherokee technique had saved a life that modern medicine had given up on. But the most significant impact was on the training of new professionals. The university's nursing school included courses on traditional medicine in its curriculum. Students learned not only modern protocols, but also scientifically validated ancestral techniques. "We are creating a new generation of health professionals," Dr. Rodriguez explained during his lectures, "who combine the best of modern science with the wisdom accumulated over millennia of empirical practice." The hospital began receiving visits from international medical delegations interested in implementing similar programs. The technique my grandmother Ruby had taught me in the fields of Tennessee was revolutionizing medical protocols around the world. Today, 5 years after that night that changed everything, I look back with a mixture of gratitude and responsibility. Michael Thompson didn't just survive, he thrived. He returned to work, saw his children graduate from high school, and became a grandfather. A lifetime that would have been lost if I hadn't trusted my grandmother's wisdom. The integrative medicine program has expanded to 8 hospitals on the West Coast. Scientifically validated traditional techniques are now standard protocols in specific situations. We've saved 17 additional lives using variations of the Cherokee technique I learned so many years ago in the fields of Tennessee. But the most important legacy isn't the numbers or professional recognition I've received. It's the change in mindset we've been able to foster in the medical community, the humility to recognize that we still have much to learn, especially from cultures that have developed profound knowledge about the human body through centuries of careful observation. My grandmother Ruby passed away when I was 23, long before I graduated as a nurse. I never knew her teachings would one day save lives in a modern hospital, but her spirit lives on through every technique I teach, every life we save, every professional who learns to combine science and ancestral wisdom. Never forget where you came from, Victoria, were his last words to me. True knowledge has no color, no age, no degree. It exists wherever human hearts are genuinely dedicated to preserving life. Today, at 62, I continue to learn. I continue to discover, and I continue to honor the legacy of a Tennessee healer who knew secrets that modern medicine is only beginning to comprehend. What do you think about Victoria Hayes' incredible story? Do you believe modern medicine should pay more attention to ancient techniques? Leave your opinion in the comments below. If this story touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more moving stories from healthcare professionals who made a difference. And don't miss our next recommended video on the screen.